Hello there. The next general election could spell doom for the UK. In maybe just over a year's time, the UK electorate will go to the polls and make their usual choice for the least worst option. And by selecting blue, we'll just get further national decline, and with red, we'll see the destruction of the UK as we know it. So don't vote for either of them. In fact, steer well clear of the Lib Dems and the Greens as well. They're even worse than Labour, if you can believe such a thing. And the first weeds are showing in a potential Labour election victory, with the Telegraph reporting that fears of a post-election Labour tax raid has business owners now searching for a way to exit their businesses. And they report that a poll by wealth manager Evelyn Partners indicates that 2/3 of UK business owners with a £5 million or more turnover are preparing their exit plans, with 40% saying they're planning to wind down or sell up within the year. This indicates that Keir Starmer's attempts to rebrand his party, together with his shadow chancellor Rachel Reeves wooing the business sector, has not convinced business that Labour is now an electable centre-ground political party. Although the FT is today running with a story about how ruthlessly Keir Starmer has dispatched Corbyn communism to the party's history books. Instead of keeping the hard left of the party in the policy loop, it says, Starmer has radically realigned his party by sidelining the left and driven Labour onto the political ground that he thinks the electorate will accept. But he's still surrounded by Corbyn supporters and the likes of Angela Rayner and John McDonnell, while the capitalist-hating unions still bankroll the Labour Party. However, I'm not convinced about Starmer's centre-ground credentials myself. But the FT also claims that this so-called party transformation has horrified the left wing of the party, who now view Starmer as a pretend lefty. Looks like a split before we're anywhere near a general election to me. And this transformation has gone nowhere near far enough to allay the fears of more tax rises amongst the business fraternity. And some of that might stem from the horrendously high taxes imposed on them already by the incumbent so-called right-wing and capitalist Tory party. Business leaders might just be thinking that tax rises are always inevitable under Labour, so let's get out while we can. Otherwise it could well be bankruptcy, even though Rachel Reeves has assured them that Labour has no plans to raise taxes. The Tories went back on their tax and state pension pledges, but we're being told that Labour won't. Anyway, in my experience, when someone says they have no plans to do something, that just means they've got a draft plan, but it's not yet been agreed to and unveiled. As I talked about yesterday, we know all about Labour's bonkers net zero plans, and when that goes pear-shaped, taxes will have to rise, and the target will be the middle classes and above, and businesses. They might even end up being forced to emulate that Tory trick and somehow ditch the state pension triple lock. And be in no doubt, Starmer will open the nation's borders, especially if he needs a Lib Dem coalition. To give you an example, talking to Patrick Christis on GB News, Lord Peter Lilly said that the Lib Dems in the House of Lords had put down a wrecking amendment that would have destroyed the illegal immigration bill, and that their spokesman said that we shouldn't even bother to try and control immigration. It's pointless, he said. And that's why I say the Lib Dems are worse than Labour. So it astonishes me that they are in second place behind the Tories in so many blue wall areas. All of this immigration requires huge house building plans. But which businesses would be up for that, given the prospect of huge taxes coming down the line being imposed on the fruits of their labours? And once again, we're up against this electoral brick wall of voting for who we see as the least worst option, instead of voting for the person who will represent our values and needs. Now, many will remember the note left in the Treasury office for the Tories when they won the 2010 general election saying, "Sorry, there's no money left." Now, I'm told that's been standard procedure to leave such a note at every election where the governing party changes. But it's a really important point. The electorate have grown so used to government stepping in with ever greater largesse to bail out this or that they've come to expect it, in much the same way that any incoming universal basic income will be expected to outstrip inflation at every subsequent general election. That means the government has to get us deeper into debt and find more ingenious ways to tax us, hoping that we won't notice, while doing their best to keep businesses within the UK, while tying them up in ever more red tape. And also remember that those inside that Labour Party generally see any profit outside of a monthly paycheck as tantamount to highway robbery. They see themselves as latter-day Robin Hoods, saving us from the horribly rich sheriff and his wealthy bosses, when all they're really doing is driving businesses into the ground and out of the country. But the Tories have already started that nonsense, and there's only one way Starmer and his team of tax and spend addicts will take this. And judging by the sort of support they get, net zero energy will be the least of our worries when we get to net zero food, because it's no longer economically viable for agriculture to continue in this country because of the ruinously high price and lack of that energy. But the Tories and Labour have signally failed to acknowledge that an economy needs a plentiful supply of cheap energy in order to flourish, and chasing wind and solar unicorns will not cut that mustard. And remember, our public service infrastructure, like the NHS, also relies heavily on cheap energy to function. That's why hospitals are one of the last things to be cut off when the generators fall silent and the lights start going out. Anyway, once the Labour tax grab inevitably starts, and there's no way it won't because so much of its financial support comes from class war activists and anti-capitalists. Once it starts, the capital flight could be substantial. And then the tax hammer has to fall ever lower down the wealth chain. In time, the biggest employer in the country will be the state, either through non-jobs to boost employment or through the handing out of a universal basic income. And I, for one, won't be falling for any Labour Party rebranding or Tory rebranding, come to that. They are both highly destructive forces that will ultimately doom the country. It's just that Labour will do it much more quickly and much more efficiently, because they know no different. To them, wealth and aspiration is evil and must be stamped out. But like all communists, they do somehow seem to view high wages and acquisition while at the top in public service as a boon for society. 'Twas ever thus. As we career headlong ever faster into a net zero black hole, we will see more and more of this waste and more unintended consequences. The National Audit Office has issued a report today where it slams the Department for Transport over its active travel plans for England. It's how to get everyone, well, the proles anyway, out of cars and onto bikes and shoe leather programme. And the upshot is that the DFT will have spent 6.6 billion quid on active travel between April 2016 and March 2025. And the NAO says, as at June 2023, DFT is not on track to achieve 3 of its 4 objectives, and progress on the 4th is uncertain. This is what happens when governments rush in and start trying to dictate to people what they must and will do, especially when it includes the removal of freedoms for the general public that they've previously enjoyed for generations, like travelling how and when they like without onerous taxes and conditions. Anyway, the report also said that the DfT does not know the totality of what local authorities have achieved through this funding and has identified that infrastructure it has funded may not have been good enough quality, including where interventions were largely cosmetic and did not provide a safe space for cycling. What doesn't seem to be mentioned is the total misery these schemes heap onto ordinary road users. You know, the drivers, and they're the ones pumping all the money in via ever-increasing taxes. And on top of that, the report says that all the money spent and the way it was implemented locally resulted in some poor value schemes and potential adverse impacts on active travel in some cases. And it's not as if they asked anyone. When the health emergency started in 2020, the Secretary of State for Transport at the time, Grant Shapps, decided it would be a wizard wheeze to grasp the opportunity and plaster the roads with all the requisite cycle lanes and the like, and handed out the dosh with the orders that it had to be spent in 4 weeks. And unsurprisingly, the NAO found that this resulted in some poor implementation of schemes in places where plans had not been developed before the pandemic and local communities were not adequately consulted. Brilliant work. And now we're on the verge of letting Keir Starmer's net zero obsessed Labour Party loose on our roads. And if he does get in with this projected 140-seat majority, then that will be taken as the whole country 100% behind him in his push to upend society and our infrastructure, whatever's left of it. Ah well, we get what we collectively vote for.